The fire started at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because that's when my phone buzzed with a notification from my smoke detector app, one I'd installed after my landlord kept ignoring my emails about the faulty wiring in the kitchen. At first, I thought it was another glitch. Then I smelled it. Burning plastic has a very specific scent: sharp, chemical, wrong. By the time I opened my bedroom door, the hallway was already hazy. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Somewhere behind the walls, something popped, loud enough to make my heart slam against my ribs. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and the jacket hanging on the back of the chair, and I ran. Barefoot, down the stairs, past neighbors shouting and coughing, and dragging pets in carriers that weren't zipped properly. The alarm was screaming like it was alive, like it wanted to crawl into my head and stay there forever. Outside, the night air hit my lungs hard, cold, clean, terrifying. I turned just in time to see flames lick out of my second-story window. My window, the one I'd sat beside every morning drinking coffee, the one I'd leaned against while on the phone with my mother just 2 days earlier. The fire trucks came fast, too fast for this to be an accident, I'd think later, but at the time, everything blurred together. Red lights, shouting, hoses unfurling like giant snakes across the pavement. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I didn't know who, I didn't ask. I stood there shaking, watching my apartment burn, and felt something hollow open up inside me. Everything I owned was in there. My clothes, my laptop, my passport, the box of letters my grandmother had written me before she died, the framed photo of me at 6 years old, missing 2 teeth, sitting on my father's shoulders. Gone. I didn't cry. Shock has a way of stealing tears and replacing them with numbness so complete it feels almost peaceful. Almost. At 3:04 a.m., after the flames were under control and the building was officially condemned, I called my parents. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. "What?" she said, irritated. "Do you know what time it is?" "Mom?" I said, my voice hoarse. "My apartment burned down." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Are you hurt?" she asked, quickly. "No," I said. "I got out in time." "Well, that's good at least." I waited. She didn't say anything else. "I don't have anywhere to go," I said finally. "I lost everything." Another pause, longer this time. "That's unfortunate, but what do you expect us to do about it?" The words landed harder than the fire ever could have. I swallowed. "I thought maybe I could stay with you for a few days, just until I figure something out." She clicked her tongue. "Absolutely not. You know we don't have space. And honestly, this sounds like one of those situations you bring on yourself." I stared at the ground, at my bare feet blackened with soot.
"Bring on myself?" I repeated. "You've always been careless," she continued. "Probably left something plugged in. We warned you about living in those old buildings." I closed my eyes. "I told you about the wiring," I said. "I sent pictures." "Well," she snapped, "you chose to stay there anyway. Not our problem." I felt something inside me snap. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a rope finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. "Can I talk to Dad?" I asked. "He's sleeping," she replied, "and I'm not waking him up for this." "For this?" I repeated quietly. "Yes," she said, "for this. You're an adult. Figure it out." Then she hung up. I stood there in the parking lot, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, watching smoke rise into the night sky where my life used to be. Not our problem. The words echoed louder than the sirens ever had. A police officer approached me gently. "Ma'am, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" I nodded automatically, even though I had no idea where that would be. "I'll manage," I said. He handed me a card. Victim Services. They can help with temporary housing. I thanked him and slipped the card into my jacket pocket next to my phone that still smelled faintly of smoke. I didn't call my parents again. I didn't call anyone. Because in that moment, something became painfully clear. If this wasn't enough for them to show up, if losing everything didn't qualify as an emergency, then nothing ever would. By sunrise, I was sitting in a cheap motel room paid for by emergency services. The blanket smelled like bleach. The bed creaked when I sat down. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone else. Hair matted, eyes hollow, a thin line of soot still tracing my jaw no matter how many times I washed my face. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, just silence. Later that morning, my father finally sent a message. "Your mother told me what happened. That's rough. Hope insurance covers it." That was it. No offer, no concern, no question about where I was sleeping. I stared at the screen until it went dark. I had always known my parents were distant, practical, emotionally economical, if you wanted to be kind about it. Love in our house was conditional, tied to achievement, to not needing too much. But this felt different. This felt final. Over the next few days, I started piecing together what little I could. I borrowed clothes from a donation center. I filed an insurance claim that I already knew would be contested. I emailed my landlord again about the wiring, attaching photos this time of the charred remains of the outlet I'd complained about for months. No response. Then, on the third day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. "This is Fire Investigator Harris," a calm voice said. "I'm calling regarding the incident at your apartment."
My stomach tightened. "Yes? We need to speak with you in person," he continued. "There are some things about the fire that don't quite add up." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I can't go into detail over the phone," he said, "but I'll be visiting the site again tomorrow. I'd like you to be there." "Okay," I said slowly. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night of the fire. Not fear. Not grief, suspicion. That evening, my mother called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "I've been thinking," she said briskly. "This whole thing is very inconvenient. Your aunt asked if we're helping you, and I didn't know what to say." I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "You can tell her the truth," I said, "that it's not your problem." She bristled. "There's no need to be dramatic." "I lost my home," I replied. "If this isn't dramatic, what is?" She exhaled. "Listen, you can't expect us to drop everything every time you have a crisis." Every time. As if my life were a series of inconveniences designed specifically to interrupt hers. "I don't expect anything anymore," I said quietly. She paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, choosing my words carefully, "that I'm done asking." We hung up shortly after that. I didn't cry. Instead, I lay back on the motel bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment I'd ever been told to be less, need less, expect less. And for the first time, I wondered, what if the fire wasn't the worst thing that happened to me? What if it was the thing that finally burned away the last illusion I had about my family? The next day, I stood behind the yellow tape as Investigator Harris walked through the blackened shell of my apartment building. He took photos, asked questions, nodded slowly as I described the wiring issues, the unanswered emails, the flickering lights. He stopped in front of what used to be my kitchen. "This outlet," he said, pointing. "You reported this?" "Yes," I replied, "multiple times." He turned to look at me. His expression had changed, subtle but unmistakable. "Did anyone else have access to your apartment recently?" he asked. I frowned. "No, just me." He hesitated, then said carefully, "We're not ruling anything out yet, but I think you should know, this fire may not have been accidental." My breath caught. "What?" I whispered. He met my eyes. "I'll be in touch." As he walked away, the weight of his words settled over me. Not an accident. I thought of my parents' reaction, the speed with which they'd dismissed me, the way my mother had sounded almost relieved. Not our problem. I wrapped my arms around me as a chill crept up my spine. Because suddenly, the fire felt like the beginning of something far bigger, and the truth, whatever it was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames crawling up the walls like something alive. I smelled smoke that wasn't there. I heard my mother's voice, "Not our problem," looping in my head like a siren that refused to shut off. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but something sharper had taken its place: alertness. When Investigator Harris said the fire might not have been accidental, it rewired something in me. Before, the fire had been a tragedy, random, cruel, devastating. Now, it felt like a question mark hovering over everything. I replayed the weeks leading up to it, the flickering lights, the outlet that sparked when I plugged in my kettle, the emails I sent my landlord that went unanswered, the maintenance request I filed twice. And then something else surfaced, a memory I hadn't thought much about before. 2 nights before the fire, my parents had come over unannounced. They said they were in the area, which was odd because they never were. My mother had walked through my apartment with that familiar look of disapproval, commenting on the clutter, the old cabinets, the unsafe building. My father had lingered in the kitchen longer than necessary. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Now, I couldn't. The next morning, I went back to the site on my own. The building was still cordoned off, but I stood across the street, staring at the blackened windows that had once been my home. A woman from the building next door recognized me. "You lived there, right?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "I'm so sorry," she replied. "That fire was terrifying." "Did you see anything unusual that night?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. "Actually, yes." My pulse quickened. "What?" "There was a man," she said slowly, "standing near the side entrance, right before the fire trucks arrived." My stomach dropped. "Can you describe him?" "Older, gray hair, well-dressed. Didn't look like he belonged there." My chest tightened. "Did you see his face clearly?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Why?" I swallowed. "Because I think I know who that was." Her eyes widened. "Should I talk to the police?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Please." I gave her Investigator Harris's card. As I walked back to the motel, my phone buzzed. My mother. I let it ring. Then my father. I answered that one. "What's going on?" His voice tight. "Your mother says you're being distant." "I almost died," I said calmly. "That's what's going on." He sighed. "You're exaggerating." That word again. "I want to ask you something. Were you at my apartment 2 nights before the fire?" There was a pause. "Yes," he said cautiously. "We stopped by." "Did you go into the kitchen?" I asked. Another pause. Longer. "Why does that matter?" he said.
"Because the fire started there," I replied. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "You're not implying." "I'm asking," I interrupted. "Did you touch anything?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Of course not." "Did you notice the outlet sparking?" I pressed. He cleared his throat. "Your building was a hazard. We told you that." "That's not an answer," I said. His tone hardened. "You're being paranoid." I felt something settle in my chest, cold and steady. "Investigator Harris says the fire might not have been accidental," I said. "What?" he snapped. "He also asked who had access to my apartment," I continued. I told him the truth. You did what? My father demanded. I told him you were there. Because you were. You had no right, he said angrily. You're trying to drag us into your mess. I almost laughed. My mess? I repeated. My apartment burned down. You always twist things, he said. This is why we keep our distance. Distance didn't stop you from showing up unannounced, I said. He hung up on me. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. Something was very wrong. Later that afternoon, Investigator Harris called. We spoke with a witness, he said. A neighbor saw someone near the building shortly before the fire, someone matching your father's description. My heart pounded. What does that mean? It means, he said carefully, that we need to ask him some questions. A knock sounded at my motel door. I jumped. Fire department, a voice called. I opened the door to find Investigator Harris standing there, along with another officer. May we come in? He asked. They sat across from me as I recounted everything, the faulty wiring, the ignored complaints, my parents' visit, their reaction afterward. And they refused to help you afterward? The other officer asked. Yes, I said. They said it wasn't their problem. Harris exchanged a look with his colleague. Sometimes, he said slowly, people distance themselves from situations they feel guilty about. A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying, he replied, that fires caused by negligence don't usually come with this many inconsistencies. He stood to leave. We'll be in touch. Please don't speak to your parents about this further. After they left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. The idea that my own parents might be involved, even indirectly, in the fire felt impossible. And yet, their indifference, their defensiveness, the speed with which they shut me down. That night, I received a text from my mother. Your father is very upset. Whatever you told those people needs to be corrected. I stared at the message. Then I typed back. I told the truth. She didn't reply. The next day, my insurance company called to inform me my claim was being placed under investigation. Due to suspicious circumstances, the agent said. Of course. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a collapsing structure, watching everything fall at once. My home, my sense of safety, my relationship with my parents. But beneath the chaos, something unexpected was growing. Resolve. I wasn't going to smooth this over. I wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't going to protect anyone at the expense of the truth. If the fire had taught me anything, it was that pretending everything was fine didn't stop things from burning. 2 days later, Investigator Harris called again. We interviewed your parents, he said. And? I asked, holding my breath. There are inconsistencies in their statements, he replied. Your father admitted to trying to fix the outlet. My knees went weak. Fix it how? He couldn't explain, Harris said, and he didn't have permission to do so. I sank onto the bed. So what does that mean? I whispered. It means, Harris said, that the fire was caused by improper tampering with faulty wiring. I closed my eyes. So it wasn't an accident, I said. It was preventable, he replied, and responsibility will be determined. After I hung up, I sat there in silence. My apartment burned because someone decided they knew better, because someone didn't listen, didn't call a professional, didn't take responsibility. And afterward, they looked at me and said, "Not our problem." I felt anger then, real anger, hot and sharp and overdue. But beneath it was something steadier. Truth. And the truth was finally catching up to them. The fire investigator had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The day after Investigator Harris told me the fire was caused by improper tampering, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Not peace, not relief, clarity. The kind that settles in after the worst truth has already landed, when there's nothing left to fear because the illusion has burned away. My phone was silent. No calls from my parents, no messages demanding I fix anything, no attempts to smooth this over. That silence told me more than words ever could. They knew. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and stared at the scorch mark on the sleeve of the jacket I'd grabbed the night of the fire. I hadn't washed it yet. Part of me needed the reminder, not of loss, but of survival.
I was alive, and now the truth was alive too. Later that morning, I received an email from my landlord's attorney. Short, formal, carefully worded. They had been notified of an ongoing investigation. They were cooperating fully. Maintenance records were being reviewed. Access logs were being pulled. I forwarded it to Investigator Harris without comment. Within an hour, my phone rang again. It was my mother. I let it ring. She called again. Then again. On the fourth call, I answered. "What have you done?" she demanded, skipping any pretense of concern. "I told the truth," I said calmly. "You told them things you didn't understand," she snapped. "You're making this worse than it needs to be." I leaned back against the headboard, eyes closed. "Worse for who?" "For your father," she said sharply. "He was trying to help you." "He almost killed me," I replied. Silence. Then, in a smaller voice, "That's dramatic." Something inside me went still. "He didn't know what he was doing," she continued quickly. "It was a simple fix. Anyone could have made that mistake." "Anyone?" I asked. "Or someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them." "You're being cruel," she said, "dragging your own parents into something like this." I laughed softly. "You dragged yourselves in when you touched wiring you didn't own." Her breathing grew sharp. "This could ruin us." I opened my eyes. "There it is," I said. "That's what this is really about." She didn't respond. "I lost my home," I continued. "Everything I owned. And you told me it wasn't your problem. That's not fair." "And now that the fire investigator is involved," I said. "Suddenly it is." "You could still make this go away," she said carefully. "You could tell them you were mistaken." "No," I replied. "You're choosing strangers over family," she said bitterly. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm choosing reality over denial." She hung up on me. For the first time since the fire, I didn't get shaken afterward. I felt resolved. That afternoon, Investigator Harris called me back to the site. The building looked worse in daylight. Blackened beams, warped metal, windows blown out and boarded up like blind eyes. He met me near the yellow tape, clipboard in hand. "We've completed the initial reconstruction," he said, "and I wanted you to hear this directly." I braced myself. "The fire originated at the kitchen outlet," he continued. "The wiring showed signs of amateur interference, improper tools, incorrect insulation." I swallowed. "So, my father?" "Yes," Harris said plainly. "We believe he attempted a repair without training. The wiring overheated, the fire spread quickly from there." "And the landlord?" I asked. "They were negligent," he replied. "You reported the issue, they failed to act. That will be addressed separately." I nodded slowly. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "there's a liability determination and potentially criminal charges, depending on intent and risk." My stomach flipped. "I don't want him arrested," I said instinctively. Harris studied me. "That's not your decision." I knew that. As we walked back toward the street, he added, "I know this is complicated, but you should know, you did nothing wrong." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That evening, my father showed up at the motel, unannounced. I saw his truck through the window and felt a flash of something old, fear maybe, or habit, but it faded quickly. I opened the door and didn't invite him in. He looked smaller than I remembered, older. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see it twitch. "You called the fire department on me," he said. "No," I replied. "I answered their questions." He scoffed. "Same thing." "Why were you in my kitchen?" I asked. He hesitated. "You were complaining. I wanted to fix it." "I asked the landlord," I said, repeatedly. "They're useless," he snapped. "Someone had to do something." "You didn't know what you were doing," I said. "I've fixed things my whole life," he shot back. "And this time," I replied quietly, "you burned my home down." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I echoed. "Fair would have been listening when I said the wiring was dangerous." He looked away. "I didn't think," he started. "No, you didn't." We stood there in silence. Finally, he said, "You didn't have to tell them it was me." "I didn't accuse you," I replied. "I told them who had access. That's the truth." He clenched his fists. "You're my daughter." "Yes," I said, "and I almost died." That landed. His shoulder sagged. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said, "This could cost us everything." I stared at him. "It already cost me mine." He left without another word. That night, I cried. Not because I missed them, but because I finally let myself feel the betrayal fully. They hadn't just failed me after the fire. They had caused it. And then they tried to erase their responsibility by erasing me. The next few weeks moved quickly. Insurance lawyers, investigators, statements, emails filled with words like liability and negligence and damages. My claim was reinstated. Temporary housing was extended.
My landlord's insurance company reached out to discuss a settlement, and my parents? They went quiet. No calls, no texts, no appearances, until the letter arrived, certified mail, from a law firm. My hands shook as I opened it. They were requesting a meeting, mediation, to resolve the matter privately. I laughed out loud. Privately? As if this were a misunderstanding between equals. I forwarded the letter to Investigator Harris and my insurance attorney. Then I sat back and let the truth do its work. A week later, my mother sent a message. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "It went too far the moment you said my home wasn't your problem." She responded almost instantly. "You're destroying this family." I typed slowly, deliberately. "No, I stopped protecting it from consequences." After that, I stopped responding altogether. I focused on rebuilding, not just materially, but internally. I found a small furnished apartment, temporary but safe. I bought clothes I liked, not replacements for what I lost, but beginnings of something new. I framed a new photo for the wall. Me, standing outside the burned building, wrapped in a blanket, alive. One evening, as I unpacked, Investigator Harris called one last time. "There will be charges," he said, "against your landlord and against your father related to reckless endangerment." My heart pounded. "What does that mean?" "It means accountability," he replied. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in the quiet of my new space and felt something unexpected. Relief. The fire had taken my home, but it had also exposed a truth I could no longer ignore, that the people who taught me to minimize my needs were the same ones who endangered my life, and that saying, "not our problem," doesn't make a problem disappear. It just guarantees that when the truth arrives, it burns through everything in its path. And this story? It was far from over. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Neutral location, neutral language, neutral promises that this would be constructive. Nothing about what I felt was neutral. I arrived early, sitting alone in the waiting room with a paper cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The walls were beige. The chairs were uncomfortable by design, I suspected, an unspoken reminder not to get comfortable anywhere. When my parents walked in,
I barely recognize them.
My mother looked brittle, her movements sharp and restless. My father's shoulders were hunched, his confidence reduced to something smaller, meaner. They didn't sit next to me. That choice said enough. The mediator introduced herself, explained the rules, the process, the importance of open dialogue. I watched my parents nod along, practiced and polite. They had always been good at appearances. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rush. I lost my home, I said calmly, everything in it. I was asleep when the fire started. If the alarm hadn't gone off, I wouldn't be here. My mother shifted in her seat. My father entered my apartment without permission, I continued. He attempted electrical work he was not qualified to perform. The fire investigator confirmed this. My father scoffed quietly. That's your version. The mediator raised a hand. Please let her finish. I met my father's eyes. After the fire, I asked for help. I was told it wasn't your problem. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. I'm here because actions have consequences, and pretending otherwise almost cost me my life. The mediator turned to her parents. Would you like to respond? My mother leaned forward. We were trying to help. She's always been dramatic. We never meant for any of this to happen. There it was. The same word. The same dismissal. She reported the wiring issue multiple times, the mediator said, consulting her notes. Why didn't you contact the landlord or a licensed electrician? My father bristled. Because I know what I'm doing. The mediator looked up. Sir, the fire report states otherwise. Silence. Then my father said, I was just trying to protect her. I laughed softly. By ignoring what I asked for and doing what you wanted? His jaw tightened. This isn't about love, I said. It's about control. My mother snapped. You're twisting everything to make us villains. No, I replied evenly. I'm refusing to be one. The mediator cleared her throat. Let's refocus. The issue at hand is liability and restitution. Restitution. Such a clean word for such a mess. They offered to cover part of my losses. Quietly, off the record. No admission of fault. In exchange, they wanted me to withdraw my cooperation with the investigation. I didn't even look at my lawyer. No, I said. My mother's face flushed. Do you have any idea what this will do to your father? Yes, I said. The same way you knew what abandoning me would do to me. You're choosing strangers over blood, his father said bitterly. I shook my head. I'm choosing accountability over silence. The mediator paused the session shortly after that. When it ended, nothing was resolved. But something had changed. They no longer looked at me like a child who could be corrected. They looked at me like a problem they couldn't control. Outside, my lawyer turned to me. You did the right thing. I nodded. I already knew. The weeks that followed were heavy. My father was formally charged with reckless endangerment. The landlord faced multiple violations. Lawsuits moved forward. Depositions were scheduled.
And the family narrative, the one that painted me as ungrateful, unstable, difficult, started to crack. Because facts don't care about reputation. Extended relatives reached out, some cautiously, some accusingly, some curious. Is it true your dad caused the fire? Why are you doing this to them? Can't you just let it go? I stopped responding. Not because I didn't care, because I finally did. I cared about myself more than preserving a lie. One afternoon, I received a message from my mother. Not angry this time. Afraid. They're talking, she wrote. People are asking questions. I stared at the screen. This was what frightened her most. Not my safety. Not my loss. Exposure. I typed back one sentence. Truth tends to do that. She didn't reply. As the legal process unfolded, I noticed something else changing too. Me. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped second-guessing my memories. I stopped apologizing for speaking plainly. I started trusting myself. The apartment I moved into slowly became home. I hung art on the walls, bought plants. built routines that didn't involve bracing for disappointment. One night, I dreamed of fire again. But this time, I wasn't running. I was standing at a distance, watching it burn out on its own. When I woke up, I wasn't shaking. That mattered. Months later, the trial date was set. My parents tried one last time to reach me through intermediaries, offers, pleas, guilt wrapped in concern. I declined all of it. When the day came, I sat in the courtroom and told the truth. Clearly, calmly, completely. I talked about the wiring, the visit, the phone call, the words, "not our problem." I watched my parents listen, really listen, for the first time. When the verdict came down, it wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no shouting, just accountability. Fines, probation, mandatory safety training, civil damages awarded. Enough to rebuild. Enough to matter.
Outside the courthouse, my mother approached me. Her face was drawn, her voice unsteady. "I never thought it would go this far," she said. I met her gaze. "Neither did I. That's why I tried to prevent it." She swallowed. "What happens now?" I thought about it. "Now," I said, "I live my life without carrying what you refuse to." I walked away before she could respond. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the floor and let myself breathe. The fire had taken a lot, but it hadn't taken my voice, it hadn't taken my integrity, and it hadn't taken my future. The final part wasn't about revenge. It was about what comes after accountability, and what I chose to build. Out of ashes, truth, and finally, freedom. The quiet after everything settled was unfamiliar. Not the kind of quiet that follows an argument, where tension still hums beneath the surface. This was different. This was the quiet of things finally being said, of damage acknowledged, of truths no longer circling, but resting exactly where they belonged. Accountability has a sound. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It sounds like silence after excuses are exhausted. In the weeks following the verdict, my parents didn't reach out. Not with anger, not with apologies, not even with the awkward small talk they used to rely on when they wanted to pretend everything was normal. They simply stopped. At first, that absence felt strange. My entire life had been shaped around anticipating them, predicting their reactions, cushioning their disappointment, adjusting myself I didn't provoke irritation or judgment. Without that constant mental noise, I felt untethered. And then, free. The insurance payout came through shortly after. Between that and the civil damages, I was able to do something I never imagined doing so soon. I bought a small place. Not fancy, not impressive, but solid, safe, wired correctly, inspected thoroughly by professionals who signed their names to every document. When I walked through it for the first time, keys warm in my palm, I didn't think about my parents. I thought about myself, about the woman who ran barefoot into the cold night and survived, about the woman who was told, "not our problem," and refused to disappear, about the woman who chose truth when silence would have been easier. I painted the walls myself. Soft colors, nothing dramatic. I wanted calm, not statements. On the first night there, I sat on the floor with takeout and no furniture, eating straight from the container and laughing quietly at the absurdity of how life rearranges itself. A year ago, I would have been afraid to laugh alone. Now, it felt like strength. People noticed the change. Friends said I seemed lighter. Coworkers commented on my confidence. Even strangers treated me differently, like they sensed something steady beneath my surface. What they didn't know was that fire doesn't just destroy, it clarifies. My parents resurfaced eventually.
Not together, not coordinated,
My father emailed first. Short, formal, almost businesslike. I hope you're doing well. I'm in counseling now. I understand some things differently. I read it twice. Then I replied with one sentence. I'm glad you're doing that for yourself. No forgiveness, no reopening, no rejection. Just truth. My mother waited longer. When she finally called, her voice sounded unfamiliar, smaller, less sure. I heard you bought a place, she said. Yes, I replied. I suppose congratulations are in order? Thank you, I said. There was a pause. I never meant to hurt you, she said finally. I closed my eyes. I know, I replied, but intent doesn't cancel impact. She exhaled shakily. I don't know how to be part of your life now. I considered that. Then start by respecting it, I said, without conditions. She didn't argue. That was new. We didn't rebuild our relationship overnight. We didn't rebuild it the old way either. No more guilt, no more obligation, no more pretending. Distance became a feature, not a failure. Boundaries became a language we both had to learn. And slowly, carefully, we found a version of connection that didn't require me to shrink. One evening, months later, I sat on my balcony watching the sky darken. The air smelled like rain. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. I thought about the night of the fire, how I stood wrapped in a stranger's blanket, shaking, staring at my life in flames. How I called the people who raised me and was told it wasn't their problem. How that sentence hurt more than anything else that night. And how in the end it became the truth that set everything else in motion. Because if it wasn't their problem, then my life was finally my own responsibility. My choices, my safety, my worth. I no longer needed permission to take up space. I no longer needed approval to be protected. I no longer needed silence to keep the peace. The fire investigator arrived, and with him, the truth. And the truth did what it always does when you let it breathe. It burned away denial. It exposed negligence. It demanded accountability. But it also cleared ground. Ground where I built something better. Something honest. Something mine. After my apartment burned, my parents said, not our problem.
They were right, just not in the way they meant. It wasn't their problem, it was my awakening. And from the ashes of what they'd dismissed, I built a life that no one could ever burn down again.